Good morning. Good morning. Good Army morning, isn't it? Thank you all for coming out today. Oh, let me get this up a little. I hope breakfast was good enough to get you started on your day, and I hope that you've had some good time to get to know one another, network a little bit, and get into your mindset of why we're all here today. Before we get started too much, I'd like to first of all introduce the president of PRSA NCC, the Public Relations Society. Believe it or not, we have a lot of people here who aren't members of the society, so PRSA, Public Relations Society of America, National Capital Chapter. We're lucky that it's we happen to be very fortunate, it's the largest chapter in the society, and because of where we are and the number of people we're able to put together panels like this today. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our president, Sabrina Kidway.
Good morning. Thank you, Mitch, for the wonderful introduction. As Mitch said, I'm Sabrina Kidwai. I am the Senior PR Manager for ASAE, and I'm also President of the chapter as of July 1st. And I'm really excited to be here this morning. For organizations like PRSA, it's really important that we think about the big issues facing the field and discuss them in forums with members as well as members in related fields. A few years ago, our chapter decided to develop a thought leadership program. And these types of events really look at the big issues facing a profession and how can we address them. And I think this morning's topic is an issue that's indeed in front of us. And it's also about the quality of public discourse. So I'm so excited about today's panel. We have leaders in journalism, marketing, PR, who will start us off to be a lively discussion. I'm so excited to hear what's going to happen. And I hope that it will offer us some answers as well as food for thought as we go along our day and into the workplace. And how can we apply it back to what we do every day? And I want to introduce Mitch, who is Mitch Brerovich, who's with the University of Maryland University College. He's also the chair of the Mid-Atlantic District, which is a district of chapters in Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania. And we all work together. We meet at least once a year, and we have professional development. And so we have officers, and so Mitch is the chair of the district. And he's also a past president of our chapter. And I would like to thank the Mid-Atlantic District because we got some funds from them and also from National PRSA, and Wiki Patrol, who's one of our sponsors for this morning's event. And thank you, panelists, again for this morning's event. Thanks.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce you to our event sponsor. Without their support, this event would not have taken place. Wiki Patrol is a company devoted to protecting you from fake news. Should it come your way. With us today are Andrew Grubbs, the founder, Andrew, and Amanda Pattenow, the CEO, and Allison Mook, the VP of Client Services. Amanda, I believe you have a few words? Yeah, thanks.
We are so excited and delighted to be able to be a part of making this event happen, not only to have a chance to meet all of you here, but to hear the really incredible panelists who are here today, because fake news is so important and so near and dear to our hearts, both as individuals and as an organization. So quick show of hands, how many of you here get information on a regular, semi-regular basis from Wikipedia? A few, okay. How many of you get information from Google or Siri or Alexa? Yeah. So I think nearly every hand just went up. And one of the things that may surprise you is how much of that information that you're getting on Google or from Siri or from Alexa is driven directly from Wikipedia. There was a time when that wasn't a relevant or trustworthy source, but more and more it has become so, and in 97% of all Google searches, it is in the top 3 results. So when you or your clients have pages on Wikipedia that can be edited by anyone, they can be edited anonymously, and the information that they put there doesn't have to be accurate or appropriate. How do you protect yourselves and your clients from those damages to their brand from fake news and alternative facts that can be posted there? Wiki Patrol offers the first line of defense there against this type of fake news by offering 24/7 monitoring, instant alerts, comprehensive analytics, and real-time information that helps you to save time manually reviewing this information and instead spending your time cultivating a brand. We are offering a special 30-day free trial to everyone who's here, so there are cards at your seats, but our entire team is here to answer any questions that you guys might have today, and we'd be happy to chat with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I really appreciate your support and your company's support for our event here. It would not have happened without you. Now, I'd also like to recognize and thank our PRSA NCC chapter sponsors who, with their generous support throughout the year, make the work of the chapter possible. Please stand up. See, Kate Perrin from Professional Services is here. Susan Apgood and Kelsey Plotnick are here. Kelsey was recently married. I always get, what's your last name? Oplanic. Sorry. Plotnick is over there. He's my adjunct professor. I don't know if Jeff Donovan from Business Wire, they were supposed to be here, but I don't know if he's made it yet. Jeff, okay. And Larry Parnell from George Washington University is our one of our sponsors as well. We deeply thank you for your support, your day in, day out support of the work of the chapter, and want to recognize you and thank you. If I could have a quick round of applause for our sponsors. For all of our sponsors. The Thought Leadership Program was created because as a professional organization representing more than 1,100 public relations and communications professionals, we have a duty to identify the issues that face the profession, to seek counsel from the profession's senior leaders, and to discuss them, to think about them. The idea of the program is to provoke this thought, to provoke discussion, to provoke provoke thought and discussion about the issues. If we discuss them, we can seek solutions and strategize. If we strategize and plan, we can practice. And if we practice, we will be prepared for the future. This year, our topic is one of concern to all communicators. Beyond fake news, the role and responsibility of communications professionals in conducting public conversations. A few years ago, I began to notice an increase in profanity that made it over the air on commercial television. The point of these invectives and attacks became personal, not necessarily to drive home a point, but to actually destroy the character of the target. And this concerned me. I was surprised, frankly, that political handlers and their communications officers didn't see what I perceived to be the self-destructive nature of these words. Worse, I found out that I was wrong. The words weren't self-destructive. The approach was actually catching. More and more political figures are personally attacking others. One could almost get immune from all the attacks. Business leaders, too. I was horrified just recently watching Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg trade personal barbs. I wondered what such polarizing actions might mean to the fabric of the organizations we represent, and the fabric of our country and our society. And then I began to wonder, what role do we play in all of this? Do we have a responsibility to shape a conversation, to work with our clients so that those conversations don't devolve into personal attacks and hate speech? Can you even have a conversation if it devolves into personal attacks and hate speech? Do we want to have conversations? The genie's out of the bottle, and our future leaders will be even more at home with technology and how will they use it? Will they bypass the communications team and the press? Can we put the genie back in the bottle? Should we put the genie back in the bottle? If so, how can we, and yet break through the clutter when others are doing it? I'm absolutely delighted to be able to present to you our distinguished panel, who will discuss with you this rising phenomenon and what it means to our professions and to our society. We'll start by taking a look at the history of character assassination and reputation politics. We'll examine the impact of that this phenomenon has on our communications professions. And finally, we'll look at some of the best practices to deal with this issue and offer you some longer-term solutions to be thinking about this problem. You can see we have a full morning ahead of us, so I'm going to stop now and introduce our panel and get on with the discussion. First, to my left, Sergei Somoyenko. He's an instructor of communications and co-founder of the Research Lab for Character Assassination and Reputation Politics at George Mason University. He also happens to be a member of the board of directors of the Public Relations Society of America's National Capital Chapter. Thank you. Thomas is here. Okay, well, but next to Sergei is Eileen Bramlett. Good morning. Eileen is the Vice President of Communications at the Copyright Alliance. She is a past president of the American Marketing Association, DC's chapter, and she holds a business leadership certificate from Harvard University. So, and next to Eileen is Thomas Burr. Thomas is and thank you for coming. I know that you were just solving a technology issue. Thank you. Thomas is the Washington Bureau Chief at the Salt Lake Tribune. Last year, Tom served as president of the National Press Club, our host today. And as you know, he was the president during a particularly tumultuous political year. He is the past chairman of the he's also the past chairman of the Congressional Standing Committee of Correspondence. Next to Thomas is Sandra Wills Hannon. Dr. Hannon, excuse me. Dr. Hannon is founder and principal of the Hannon Group, a public relations and market research firm headquartered in National Harbor, Maryland. Before forming the Hannon Group, Dr. Hannon was a vice president at Fleischman Hillard. In 2007, Dr. Hannon became the first African-American president of the Public Relations Society's National Capital Chapter. Welcome, thank you. And next to thank you, next to Sandra is Robert Weiner. Robert is the president of Robert Weiner Associates and Weiner Public News. He's a White House correspondent, radio commentator, and author of hundreds of op-eds that are published in major newspapers. Robert also served more than 30 years in the legislative and executive branches of our government, where he was a public affairs director for the Clinton and Bush White Houses and spokesman for the White House Drug Policy Office. He also served as chief of staff of the U.S. House Aging Committee. But among all of his accomplishments, Robert is most proud of winning the 2016 National Press Club President's Award for mentoring young journalists. And last but not least is Rich Sheehy. Rich Sheehy is the senior research fellow at George Mason, is a senior research fellow at George Mason University and leads the GMU-affiliated stratcom360.org. It's a think tank on communications best practices. He's also owner of the Sheehy Group, an independent consulting firm advising private and public sector clients in strategic communications. Before entering public relations, Richard was a national news correspondent and anchor for the NBC network, as well as a contributing writer for the New York Times and Associated Press. Each of our speakers has a particularly unique prism through which to view the state of our public discourse and our role and our responsibilities as communications professionals in it. I think with your engagement, please bring your questions. With your engagement, we will leave here much smarter and much better prepared to face the future of our professions. If I may introduce, once again, Sergey, he's going to kick us off.
Thank you, Mitch. Good morning, everyone. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here this morning and start this wonderful discussion. So I would like to start off with this idea that the whole notion of fake news is not new. It's been around for a long time. We've known this idea about yellow press. What has changed actually is the speed, the velocity of information, and the ease of how this information is being distributed right now. So if you would like to see the overall historical overview of how the whole thing has started, there's a wonderful book by Matt Bai, who's a journalist at Yahoo News, and he had this book about Gary Hart, and he talks about how technological advancement and development and the Watergate scandal contributed to this media environment that we have right now. But we also have to look at fake news as, certain types of misinformation and disinformation. And those are two different issues, because misinformation is unintentional information that we find online and we find all over the media right now. And we have, of course, the disinformation, which is a deliberate and planned and sustained and strategic attempts to spread rumors and gossip and all kinds of falsehoods that we find everywhere. So, and there are a lot of different reasons how those things occur. For example, misinformation, well, I really would like to focus on the 24 news cycle, which really put the news out of balance. And when we think about objective news, which is, some people say it's unachievable and very idealistic idea, but we still look for two things. Well, first of all, we'll look for depersonalized content, which pretty much needs to be free of personal bias or any ideological evaluation. And we look at, the actual balance, how different points of view and how different sides are being represented. So it's not like one-sided, but all sides in the story are equally get at least equal time. So, and of course, the changing in the media environment and really in 24/7 news cycle, and some people call it Twitter cycle right now because it's not 24 news anymore. It's a Twitter cycle. Creates a little pressure on the economy of the news market. And pretty much what creates what Robert Entman calls production biases. And those are simplification of information, symbolization, and personalization. And so pretty much all content we see right now, it's plain, clear, and there is not much content or context for people to read. So information is simple, has to be really provided in snackable bites of content so everybody can digest it well, depending on your media metabolism, of course. So it has to be really well understood within this certain culture, so familiar. That's why we see a lot of people, a lot of political actors who know how Twitter works. They operate with those slogans that we really recognize and we understand how they work, but they're really short and they really stick, so we really remember them. And information becomes very personalized. And if I have time, I will address today this recent report of our lab on character assassination, how the whole venom, incivility in politics and in character attacks became normalized. And later on, we can take a look at this wonderful report we just published last week, and it's also available online. So please take a look. And Rich will have a chance to talk about those things a little bit as well. But just like I mentioned, also we live in this culture of clickbait, where clickbait content really based on sensational information is profitable, and it really drives traffic and profits, and that's. Look at this. Last week, Antonio Scaramucci's recent interview with the New Yorker. Within 4 days, it has been viewed 4.4 million unique times, so it got 4.4 unique visitors, and actually made it the most read article on New Yorker in 2017. So it really sells, and a lot of news outlets benefit from publishing that clickbait content that has sensational headlines, and everybody wants to click and share. And that's why we those inaccurate information that has biases, a lot of helpers. There are lots of helpers out there. Everyone is a reporter. Everybody is, wants to share those news. And if you look at Pew Research in 2016, they said that average American citizen, even being aware of this information might not be true, acknowledge sharing this information with friends. So pretty much we all contribute to circulation of this information. There are all kinds of helpers, which I'm not going to mention today, but there are like a lot of bloggers, citizen journalists, a lot of people who migrated from 24-hour cable news into the internet, who have something to say. So a lot of people who have very few facts but have opinion, and they would like to participate and they would like to say something. And of course, we don't have to forget the comedians, and comedians really, really contribute to how we watch the news. In 2004, there was research by, again, Pew, who found out that 61% of young people under 30 got their political information from late night comedy shows. It was 2004. Well, think about statistics right now. So there are a lot of other variables, a lot of factors we can mention in relation to misinformation, but there's also disinformation, of course, and there are some planned, deliberate attacks and campaigns. So Internet Date Society just published also a very nice report about internet subcultures who actually propagate and contribute to conspiracy theories. Well, and they mentioned Pizzagate scandal that we know last year happened, right? So a lot of opinion leaders online in their gated communities and really contribute to the spread of this information. There are a lot of far-right groups also very active, using bots and memes and different social media techniques. So, so in this environment, when pretty much we have the media that is dependable on sensational materials, clickbait materials, it's very vulnerable to all kinds of media manipulations, and it gives room for incivility. It's very conducive to incivility, encourages character attacks. That's what we covered in our report, and legitimizes all kinds of uncivil behavior, which was not really norm, back in the days. So at this point, tabloid journalism, personal ridicule, they thrive, they continue to circulate, they bring profit, and this is a problem, and this is something we would like to address, and we need to address today, and hopefully my colleagues will continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thomas, come on up. You don't need me. I'll just sit down here and let the show go.
Good morning, and thanks for the introduction, Mitch. Let me add one more thing. My name is Tommy, and I am not an enemy of the people. I sometimes feel I have to say that these days, which is really hard. Thanks for all being here. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to tick through a lot of talking points. And sorry I was a few minutes late. We switched over to a news system, my newspaper yesterday, so I had an email to a bunch of subscribers today that had a hard time getting out, but it's out. So I think everyone in the room knows the role of the news media, a check and balance on the government, on society. We are not people to be liked. We are to be respected. I've never had the point in my career where I've ever hoped that a senator, a congressman, anyone that I cover really likes me, because I don't care. I want you to actually respect me and hopefully not, hate me necessarily. When I started in journalism, I think anyone who went to J school probably heard the term, the phrase, our job is to comfort the inflicted and afflict the comfortable. If you don't understand, the concept is the idea that if you're very comfortable in life, we want to make sure you know that everything is not going perfect. If you think that, if the big tragedy strikes in the world, we want to let you know what happened and how maybe we can stop it from happening again. And Shushay went over a lot of these things, but let me go through a couple too. There's a big difference between satire and fake news. I personally love The Onion. Their depiction of Joe Biden is absolutely one of my favorite things in the world. But there's a big difference between Area Man does X and the idea of creating something on purpose to make people believe something that is not true, which we're seeing more and more, sadly. Alternative facts is a term, a phrase that you've heard a lot lately. Let me address that quickly. If I were to tell you right now to go outside, the sky is blue. Everyone agree? Sky is blue? Cool. What if it was nighttime? Sometimes the sky is not blue. If it's cloudy, maybe it's gray. So I think we have to understand that they're not alternative facts, there are nuances. And sometimes you can talk about, well, this is the case, and somebody else can argue that that's not the case. Nuance is really something that matters a lot. I am concerned very much so, and we all should be, about the idea that facts don't matter anymore. This White House, more than any I've covered so far, has a problem understanding about facts. And in a world where facts don't matter, the biggest liar wins. And that is something that we should all be very concerned about. As Sergey talked about, attacks on the press are not new. We've always been the boogeyman. I welcome it. If I can criticize people, then I should be able to be criticized myself. The problem I continue to see is that when you denigrate the media to the point that no one believes the media anymore, then again, facts don't matter. You can say what you want. You can get away with what you want to. There's got to be a stopping point. I personally am not a clickbait kind of person. I don't like to ever think that I'm writing a story to get somebody to click on there. Look, do I want to make the headline really great? Of course. Do I want people to click on my story? Great. But I'm not going to continue to be a journalist, a good journalist, I hope, if I'm just writing stories for the purpose of getting people to click on them. A few other things I want to talk about, silos and echo chambers. We as a society, I'm very concerned, are drifting to the point where we only listen to Fox News and read Drudge, or watch Rachel Maddow and read HuffPo. We sometimes forget that we should challenge ourselves and actually think, if this is what I believe, maybe I should see what the other side says, and challenge myself to understand: am I really talking? Do I really believe this? Can I defend what I'm believing? It is a danger to society. It's a danger to our democracy when we have a public that is not critically thinking about what they're reading and what they're believing about what's going on. I don't know how much time I have left. A couple things, but one thing I'll say about the media: when we get it wrong, we correct it. I cannot say the same about this White House. If I get something wrong in a news story, then the next day it's going to be there, Tommy screwed up X, essentially. And that's fine, because I'd rather have it right and correct it. I can't say that President Trump has done that so far, and that's kind of sad. So what do we do now? We continue to do our jobs. And we continue our jobs in the best possible way, because nothing is more important right now, I think, than a free press, a check on the government, a check on this White House, this administration, on Congress, and to do it with vigor, and to do it accurately, to do it quick, maybe more than 140 characters, but to do it right. And let me leave you with one quote, my favorite quote. This is from Thomas Jefferson in 1787. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. Thank you.
Eileen, you can come up here. You can speak from wherever you want. Wherever you're comfortable.
Thank you. Thanks, Mitch. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. A quick question for all of you here this morning. Who besides me feels that they're more skeptical of news and information today than they were, say, 5, 10 years ago? I'm in good company. I knew it. I knew that was the case. I believe that your skepticism and mine come from what our my two fellow panelists talked about a little bit earlier, which is that we are in an age of information overload. I personally and professionally love social media. That's part of my job, and I tweet many, many times a day. Maybe not as much as some folks who tweet 3, 4, 5 messages on one topic or on one comment, but I think that a lot of our the overload that we experience and the multiple sources that we experience don't help us digest information better, and they don't help us believe what's true because we're bombarded by information 24/7. And there is no such thing as a news cycle anymore. There's constant, evolving, changing information that you have to, to be level-headed and to stay sane, you have to check the sources. Sometimes I'll read something, and I am skeptic these days. I'll read something, and I'll go to 2 or 3 different sources to find out, is it true? Is it just gossip or, nonsense, or is it indeed fact? When it comes to marketing, I don't know that you naturally think of marketing and fake news going hand in hand, but they do. And in fact, as we all know quite well, marketing has historically, unfortunately, skirted the line for, since the beginning of time. Since ancient Rome, we've had people selling something that was not necessarily what it was described or portrayed to be. So fake news, when it comes to marketing or when it comes to anything, any kind of communications, is not a new phenomenon. But because we live in this this time where it's so heightened and people are so skeptical, it's difficult to trust any sources of marketing. You've got clickbait, as Sergey talked about. You've got puffed up pieces. You've got sensationalized headlines that don't necessarily correlate to what's being sold. When you click on the headline and you click on the link and you think you're getting XYZ, you actually get ABC, something far more tame or something far different than what was portrayed and advertised. It's sad and it's discouraging, and at the same time, I think that all of us here in this room and all the many other members of PRSA and AMADC, et cetera, I think we have a role to play as leaders. And I know it sounds somewhat contrived and old-fashioned, but there are standards of ethics when it comes to things like PR and marketing. PRSA has a standards of ethics set of guidelines, and so does AMADC, American Marketing Association. And I think all of us as leaders should be committed to, as corny and old-fashioned as it may sound, I think we should all be committed to standing up, saying what's true, acting, as honorably as possible when it comes to being a marketer or a PR person or a journalist or whatever you may do, and helping to perpetuate what's honest and what's true and what's right, not something that is intended to misinform or to guide people in a direction that's not true to what it's supposed to be. So I think there's no magic, magic answer, if you will, or magic gun. That's not the right term. What am I trying to say? Magic bullet. Thank you so much. I clearly need some more coffee this morning. But there is no magic bullet when it comes to this topic. And on one hand, I am absolutely fascinated by it. I can't read enough about it because I want to learn what's at the root of it, what's at the heart of it. And on the other hand, I am absolutely petrified of it. When you live in a world where you don't know the source of info, the intention of info, the intention of something being marketed to you, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty nerve-wracking. And I do think that, we've probably all hit the pinnacle of what we can take in terms of that sort of thing, in terms of fake news, in terms of misinformation, et cetera. The only answer that I have is to do the right thing, say the right thing, be honest, be truthful, be ethical. I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room, but that's okay, because we'll go out and we'll do our jobs, as discussed earlier, and hopefully we can have an impact on those we work with, people that we market to, people that we communicate with. I think this dialogue will go on for a very long time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I look forward to continuing to learn and to continue this conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, good morning. It works. All right, it works. Thank you very much, and I'm so pleased to be part of this discussion this morning. And so clearly, we're in very challenging times for people in communications, marketing, and public relations. I do want to point out, though, that there is a positive side. There's a little bit of silver lining in the storm of influx of information that we're getting, and that is that the barriers to sharing and getting information are at an all-time low. So the one upside is that, we can share information quickly to a very large audience. So that's one thing on our side. Of course, the downside is that when everyone has a platform, almost all the platforms look alike, so it's hard to distinguish the truth or versions of the truth from outright fake news. We're at a kind of crossroads here, and times have changed. It's hard to think of any one institution or one media personality that can influence maybe a whole country. And believe it or not, we did have such a time. Recall when Walter Cronkite criticized the Johnson administration for the way they handled the Vietnam War. And LBJ was famously saying, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the country. Well, today I challenge anyone to think of any one institution or media that has that kind of influence. So yes, we're clearly, as we found out earlier today, at a time where trust in institutions are basically at an all-time low, in my opinion. And so while that creates challenges, it still also creates an opportunity for those of us in public relations and marketing and advertising to show our worth and show how we can help our clients cut through all the noise, cut through all the fake news, and get our messages across. So in my experience as a PR professional, two strategies have served myself and my team very well. And the first one is investing in market research. We think it's critical to take a step back before you start to create your campaign, before you start to create your messaging, and really understand your audience and what your audience wants. My company, the Hannon Group, is kind of at the intersection of market research and communications. And we have learned that you just can't separate an effective communications campaign from thorough analysis and truly understanding your audience before you even begin the creative process, begin your messaging, begin your strategic planning. That's why our firm is focused so heavily on research. We know that the best communications campaign in the world will really not be effective if you don't understand where your target audience is in this world. Our second strategy, and I'll have a case example to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. Our second strategy is going back to rhetoric and the art of speaking plainly. I think today audience are savvier than ever, and they have a nonsense detector. So when you're speaking in jargon and buzzwords and alternative facts, the detector just flies off the handle. So for us, the important thing is to kind of share messages in the same way that you would with a friend over dinner. You don't dumb it down, but you don't speak with frills or pretense. You speak in your authentic voice. And that is what we work so hard to do with our clients as well, is finding what is important to the audience and then sharing that message that resonates with them in an authentic voice. And we find that when you put those two together, that cuts through the clutter, that cuts through the noise and the fake news. I want to give an example of that. And one of our projects was with the CDC, and they brought us in to help them develop a campaign targeting parents to encourage them to take their children for flu vaccinations. Well, I'm sure everyone here knows about the controversy surrounding vaccinations, and there are an incredible number of sources providing information, some of it accurate, some of it incredibly inaccurate, and outright fake and wrong. So we're dealing with a target audience that is in the midst of the storm of all these different sources of information, some right and some inaccurate. So the first thing that we did was to outreach to the parents, and we conducted a slew of focus groups and in-depth interviews to find out, what are their sources of concern, where do they get their information from, and we wanted to know the fears that drove those concerns. And we heard information like, well, flu vaccinations give you the flu. They're injecting the flu into you. They don't take time to test the vaccinations. A whole number of concerns that they found from the internet, from Googling, from getting all kinds of sources of information when you can't tell what platform is true and what is not. So we use that intelligence to incorporate that into the design of our campaign, and then find the messaging that was in an authentic voice. And our research told us that for them, what would be authentic would be the clear facts in plain English from a reliable source that was unbiased. So that was the focus and impetus for our campaign. That was the core of our campaign, and that became our authentic voice through which we could cut through an incredible amount of clutter and fake news and get the real information out to the targeted audience and those parents who were justly concerned about making the right decision for their child. So in the end of the day, I believe we have so many different challenges in navigating these waters, but by using research to step back and to clearly understand your audience and find out what their concerns and issues are, and then taking that and providing a message in an authentic voice helps you to cut through that clutter, cut through the noise, and push aside that fake news, and ultimately help your client reach your target audience with the correct messaging. I think I made my 7 minutes. And I look forward to hearing others' perspectives on this discussion. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot. Boy, there's so many things I could say just by, what I've heard my colleagues up here talk about. And to your point, Sandra, about the CDC, I should give you some context here that my perspective, I've worked as a journalist, I've worked as a public affairs person, I've worked on both sides of it, and I've worked in some of the academic realms. And I think the key here is the more we can pull ourselves out of the daily tactical eddies and currents of what's coming at us, and again, like at Twitter pace, and sort of pull out to the larger context, the more we're going to get our grounding and the more we're going to get some context. And so it's really the difference between being blindsided by each wave of an ocean versus pulling back and sort of understanding what the currents are. So any particular wave might be unexpected, but if you understand the larger context, that it's a little bit easier to navigate. And I mentioned the CDC because my background is in crisis communications, crisis and emergency risk communications, and CDC really I hold up as a great resource. I've been affiliated with them since 2003, and they have a ton of great resources, including the crisis and emergency risk communications curriculum. And that really sort of got a lot of lift after 9/11. And there was funding and interest in sort of really understanding how we deal with crisis. And the reason crisis communications is so relevant is because of all the statistics that we teach in our workshops at the CDC is one that really stands out, is that 80% stress and cognition are compromised by up to 80%. Cognition is compromised by up to 80% when you're in the midst of stress, which explains a lot. And in terms of explains a lot in terms of if you're in school and you're taught to deal with a fire, what do we say? Stop, drop, and roll. To keep disease from spreading, cover your cough. Very simple messages, because our brains just can't handle more critical thinking, I think, as Thomas mentioned, when we're under stress. And the reason this is so important is that the current climate is one of constant stress and constant destabilization. And I think that we're now 7 or 8 months into the presidency. I think we've had our grace period about being whipsawed, and now we really need to sort of get to that next level, is what are the overall dynamics? What's this taxonomy, a lay of the land versus sort of just dealing with tactical in day in and day out, just being sort of blindsided by the latest tweet or the latest outrage. There's a concept called emotional saturation. And there's a lot of science behind this. Stratcom360.org is the think tank that I'm affiliated with at George Mason University, but it's really derived from a lot of what I do in my work, which is to sort of look at dynamics, look at what the stakeholder concerns are. And when there's stress, we have to actually add additional analysis. We have to add additional cautionaries to really sort of make sure the messages are clear, consistent, credible. There's a principle that at the CDC we use called STARK, simple, timely, accurate, relevant, and credible. So, and if you want a very internet mobile friendly shortcut to sort of some of these dynamics, you could check out atlasofemotions.org. And this is really a way that sort of neuroscience and psychology has sort of put the lens on some of these communications issues, and to sort of emotional saturation and some of these other dynamics can sort of come to the fore. So what does this all mean for communicators? And I think that what it is get over it. And not get over it in the way that some of the most ardent Trump supporters might have said that in the early days, like he's president, deal with it, get over it. I'm saying get over it in the sense that understand the larger dynamics so that we can navigate them better. A perfect example I would sort of throw up here just to round out my comments is what's called a shock event. Has anyone ever heard that term, shock event? All right, this is something that came out, it's been around for a while, but it's a concept that came out especially with the immigration ban, and it's by a Heather Richardson from Boston College. She's an American history professor, and she talks about a shock event, and it's really, on the face of it, it's not rocket science. It's not anything that's, Republicans or Democrats. So just to give you a couple examples, the travel ban, that was considered a shock event because it really came in conjunction with a flurry of a lot of other executive actions that was very hard to pay attention to because everyone was focused on that immigration ban. I would argue that even the transgender tweet from last week would qualify as that because it was right along this time there was another surprise vote on health care. Again, to be bipartisan, and Robert, you could probably make sure to fact check me on this, but Bill Clinton was, I would argue, he'd done that too. In December 1998, there was something called Operation Desert Fox. And it was a 4-day bombing campaign against Iraq. It happened to happen at the same time the House was doing impeachment proceedings. In fact, he was impeached on December 19th, and that was the last day of the bombing campaign. There was also something called Operation Infinite Reach, back in August of that year, 3 days after Clinton was called to testify before the grand jury about the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and they even called that Monica's War. Again, just to say, okay, that's a shock event. Boy, wow, that's freaky, or that's common. Again, I'd say we need to go a little further than that as communicators. We need to actually understand so that we can protect against that and communicate through that, I think, as Sandra mentioned. So. And again, we're talking about silver linings. A successful shock event, this woman writes, this Heather Richardson, depends on speed and chaos because it requires knee-jerk reactions so that people divide along established lines. But there is a silver lining in it, this sort of speaks to the coalition building that Sandra mentioned, is that if people realize they're being played, they can reach across old lines and reorganize to challenge the leaders who are pulling the strings. This was Abraham Lincoln's strategy way back in the Civil War when he joined together the Whigs, Democrats, Free Soilers, anti-Nebraska voters, and nativists into the new Republican Party to stand against slave power. That was a result of a shock event, and basically 5 years before, such a coalition would not have been imaginable. So I think that the more we can sort of zoom out and understand the overall dynamics, and to the extent that we can put research or lessons learned or best practices behind it, we'll get out of this daily reactive mode and be a bit more proactive, a bit more agile in dealing and navigating what we call fake news.
Okay, so since I have to maybe summarize, although thanks, you did a bit of it, that was great. I'll come up here. First of all, Mitch, thank you for inviting me. This came about at the inauguration of Tommy, your successor, when we sat together at dinner and we talked about what you were doing, and it was just brilliant to have this forum. So I'm really appreciative that you're having it, and thanks for including me. I've had the privilege of being able to take part at all levels of government and now in the press. And I am so blessed with that, but as Mitch said, I'm happiest with now what I'm doing, which is I have a foundation called Solutions for Change, which supports young journalists who co-author op-eds in top newspapers, and we've done some 800 of them. And it's been very gratifying, and to see the energy and the enthusiasm of young people in our field is just remarkable. And we work oftentimes right out of the National Press Club up in the top floor, and we gather and we meet, so, and we strategize the op-eds. And it's really terrific to be able to be included now in the White House briefings because of those op-eds. It's also a sad experience to be included in the White House briefings because of those op-eds. And that's kind of where we're going to go here. So, Mitch, you pointed out that profanity is growing. It grew and exploded with Scaramucci. The words that he used were just unbelievable, and I'm not going to repeat them because they're not fit even for a group this old, you know. So, but Sarah Sanders said at the briefing, one of the recent ones I was at, that for a person in his position, the president made the decision that he shouldn't be there. And Kelly is really making a difference. I think his coming in made a difference and assisted. So if that's what happens, the problem is that we think that every time, how many times have we heard, Trump is going to be more presidential? And it's been from a year before the campaign ended, through the transition, to the beginning, to now, you know, and it lasts 3 days and then explodes again. So we just don't know what's going to happen here. And we have to keep our antennas up. So, and then Tommy, you pointed out we have to respect, not like the media, and that's exactly right. It's our job and it's public affairs jobs to actually seek the truth. Sandra, you pointed out that the information barriers are now low, but we have to sift for the truth, and we have to work at it. Exactly right. Serge, fake news has been around for a long time, but not at this depth and speed. It is the most I've ever seen in my entire career. Just to make things up and pretend that they're the truth, the alternate facts that we all talk about. Rich, look for the context. Exactly right. You have to see the forest for the trees in terms of what we do. But just the pace, just today, that Tillerson is rejecting $80 million in public affairs money to counter ISIS's propaganda. How? And the reason that the media is stating, and we'll see whether that answer holds, is because it's going to offend Russia. I mean, that actually is the answer that they use in terms of why he's rejecting that $80 million. It's also an answer that's being used in terms of his hollowing out the entire State Department. That's got to scare us, and you have to look for the reasons. The other thing, affirmative action. The fact that they're turning the Justice Department now into affirmative action for Caucasian Americans. That actually is what they're doing. They're saying not go after blacks, but it's an affirmative action case if it discriminates against white. The whole purpose is to assist minorities. That's what affirmative action means. So that's an incredible story. Trump's son putting out the answer on why he did the Russian meeting, and now Trump is saying any father would weigh in terms of dictating the answers. So of course he wasn't involved at all in the decisions that were revolving around that meeting. No, of course not. Now the bar keeps moving. The bar keeps moving, and so now it's Sarah Sanders at the briefing said that he weighed in. Well, there it is. He weighed in. So, and then you've got the police being, this one really offends me, having been John Conyers' communications director for 6 years, about police should be rough. It's okay. Boy, what happened with Freddie Gray and Rough Rides, that was a horror story and assisted in causing his death. When he didn't get the medical attention. And so for that to be okay, and then the answer that they give in the White House briefing is, I believe he was joking. Well, that's not a joke, and even if it's half in jest, it's not a joke. It was not a joke. It was a message to police, do what you want. And that's just outrageous. So, and then, of course, they're bringing up the Seth Rich story again. So that's just today's news. I mean, my God, you know? So that's the pace that we have to deal with. So, productive messaging in the era of Trump for both our stories and our clients. Regardless of the spin that we don't, we do. And we all do, both for our clients and for our stories, Tommy, and we all know it's true. We select the subjects, the agendas, the storylines, and the messages that in our minds move the country forward. That's our responsibility. If we didn't do that, we're not human beings in terms of selecting the stories. Of course, we're assigned stories, and we have to cover stories, and we have to have clients, and we have to help clients. But the direction that we take them is up to us. How and what directions are matters of variation, but somehow we all want to improve people's lives. And we have to get past gridlock, by the way, where the Republicans want to end anything that is branded Obama, and the Democrats diss everything that's Trump. Granted that gridlock and partisan war may have started long ago, maybe my own view is with Gingrich's contract with American delays hammer and gerrymandering, and the Democrats are just as guilty at going for minority districts as the Republicans are going for all Republican white districts. But it's a plague on both our houses. But we have to get past that. So we have to be able to say that Trump does some things right, even if he doesn't help his cause, by bad-mouthing his opponents and tweeting the opposite of his staff's careful messaging defenses. So what he's done right included a brilliant speech in Poland that captured the hearts of European values and history, and he pressed at the beginning of his term for infrastructure. He unified many Americans on trade, brought Bernie Sanders and his wings, brought that all together and really reversed the Republican Party attitude toward that. Protecting Social Security, those are issues that he has been fabulous on, actually. So we've done op-eds finding common ground. We had just out a couple of days ago in a major USA series, Democrats and Republicans should work together on health care. I mean, that's where we have to go, and that's where we should be pushing the country. So push on the issues where change can happen, but you have to ask direct questions. I'm not going to go through the ones that I've done to Rick Perry, to Mnuchin, to Scott Pruitt, to Sean Spicer, to Sarah Sanders in the White House briefings. But my take is not hit them personally, but hit them on the issues and to move them so that they have to answer in ways that look good for the country. And by the way, Trump has said so many things in so many different directions that it's easy to find a quote that he said that should move the country in the right direction. You just pick that one and say, why isn't he moving in that direction on a particular issue of the day? And so that's where I think we can go. The media's criticism on the health bill and Russia, as long as they're documented and valid, those are terrific, as well as the criticisms against his dissing every opponent in sight and destroying the presidential model for our children. I mean, I thought that what he did in both two places were really, honestly, disgraceful. What he did at the CIA wall when he talked about crowd size, and what he did at the Boy Scouts, where he had the opportunity and should have used the opportunity to bestow values on our children and what it means to be president of the United States and the glorious values that this country has and what they could do for their futures. What an opportunity that would have won him an enormous amount of points, but instead, you all know what he did there. So those criticisms are valid. But it is the media's responsibility to to point out the good that comes. And you have to do it in a bipartisan way. In the House Aging Committee that I had the privilege to work for, Claude Pepper, we abolished mandatory retirement. That was a very controversial thing. Big business didn't want it, and big labor didn't want it because both sides wanted to be able to control everything themselves. But it passed 359 to 2 in the House, 89 to 10 in the Senate, with Pepper, Grassley, and Hatch. And also creating an anti-drug media campaign with Newt Gingrich and Clinton, led by Barry McCaffrey, who was my boss. That reduced youth drug use by 30% in the last 3 years of McCaffrey's term because advertising works. And so Clinton and Newt Gingrich on a balanced budget. That was phenomenal. The last 3 years had a balanced budget. They worked together. And of course, everyone knows the example of Pepper, O'Neill, and Reagan on saving Social Security. By the way, which still is true. It goes on for another 30 years. The myth of the deficit is ridiculous because people have paid in. Trump has made that point. So those are bipartisan things. So are there really a couple of questions I want to leave everybody with. Are there really two sides and an obligation to equally report them when one is clearly fake news, even if the other side claims the truth is what's fake? That's a challenging question about how bipartisan the media has to be when really one side is right and one is wrong, whether it's Trump or the Democrats. And where is the coverage of not just the administration's agenda and challenges now because of the Russia thing and because of the failure on health care, but the Democrats came out with an enormous thing, the better deal, and it got zero press. Zero press. That's the potential of being the same as the contract with America that Newt Gingrich had, and there is a real possibility that the Congress will flip in the off-year election. So if there is, that's going to be what happens. It's gotten zero press. So that's something that really needs to be done. And what do you do when fake news and spin or alternate facts come from the top? I mean, that's a serious problem. So as has been said here, you counter it. You try to tell the truth, you try to amplify your message, and you have to do that. So finally, a question, and this one has struck me. This is sort of like to the president. Mr. President, you can be smart, but not pretend you're smart. You can be smart if you do some homework. You don't have to say the first thing that comes into your head without a briefing or without a cross-check with experts. If he did that, and I hope that Kelly does that for him, and I hope that all of us in our fields do that for him, we can really improve the state of the news and the state of public affairs in our country. Those are just some thoughts.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much.
Q&A. So this event is being recorded, just so you know. It'll be available on the PRSA NCC website as soon as that Thought Leadership website is finished. It'll be up there. And but in order to have some kind of order, and so that we can hear the question, if you just kind of raise your hand, I'll come up to you, and I'll, you can have the mic, and then you can engage the panel. Okay, hang on. So let me give this back to that side over there. Okay, Larry was first.
But ladies first, no?
Okay, Larry, sure, there you go.
And who says chivalry's dead? Yes, exactly. Thank you, Larry. Guys, you talked about even citing like ancient times, Monica Lewinsky's war, Watergate coverage, if kind of we could see the roots of what we're seeing today in all of those events or historical times. What do you think the Trump effect's going to be 20, 30 years from now?
Who's our futurist?
I don't
Robert's
know if I
going
can
to take that.
I don't,
It's not going to be the final answer. Where does this thing work? Push the button.
Push the button, wait for it to go from red to green.
There we go. Yes, red to green.
Yeah, the light should be red.
Green, green, green. Green, okay. The next president is always the opposite of the last one. That's how we always do it. You always look for a counter. We looked for a counter to Nixon. We looked for, a counter to Carter because he was too soft. You look for a counter to Bush because he wasn't well-founded. So you have the even-keeled Obama. The next, and incredibly substantive, you always look for the opposite. It's like the rules at the Democratic and Republican Party conventions always make the rules for what they didn't like about the last time, except that it never applies to the next time. So it's impossible to know what the effect of Trump is. It's going to be historic. I'm not sure it's going to be positive historic, but he still has an opportunity. It's not too late, but I mean, the thing that bothers me most in his history and in the legacy is the horrible model of what he's done to the presidency for our children. And we were just talking about this on the way here, actually. To set up a framework, which they're proud of in the briefing room. They're proud of the fact, and they brag that he set up a competition among his staff so that they go at each other. What kind of thing is that instead of building collegiality and building teamwork, which is what should be done? I mean, I know that when four-star General McCaffrey, you'd always have, and Clinton, they'd always have interim progress reviews, and you bring everybody together and you get on the same page. That's how you're supposed to organize. So what this president is doing is horrific in terms of, and it's stopping people from wanting to be in public service. That's the other danger of it, is that who would want to work for this guy, knowing the turmoil that he creates and the fact that he's going to create enemies against you if he doesn't like the first thing. What he's done to Sessions is just, and I disagree completely with Sessions. Look what he's doing on affirmative action today. But what he's doing to him, doing it that way, and picking on your attorney general, I don't understand. So I'm hopeful that this legacy does not continue.
I would just,
go ahead.
I would just say that, you know, in terms of looking forward, I think that's a really great question, to say, well, okay, what's all this mean, you know, 10, 20 years from now? And I think one of the things is that truth is no longer a given, it's becoming a differentiator. And in fact, if you look at the New York Times, the truth matters, and that's why their advertising is all based upon, truth. And it's like, so that I think the evolution is going to be, you now have choices, just like social media, there are all sorts of choices. Well, now in terms of this political arena, there are all sorts of choices in terms of the level of credibility. And I think right now, everybody's still in like shock, like, oh my God, all these things we assumed about, truth and assuming it's right, we're questioning our assumptions. This is almost like disruptive innovation for politics, the same way that, the iPhone disrupted innovation for technology and what we considered as a phone. So what I think is what we'll see is 10, 20 years from now, we're not going to take the truth and accuracy as a given. It's going to be the kind of thing that it's almost like we'll certify it the way we certify, Underwriter's Laboratory, that our lamp is not going to explode on us. I think that you're going to get some standards around that used to just be taken for granted.
Well, I just want to piggyback on what Rich have said, and we actually mentioned a couple of these points in our report. Not really sure about 20, 30 years, but you can see about 4 years what's happening right now. Two major trends. The first one is that it really changes the notion of the standard. So, and I can see it with a lot of my students. They getting less quality content, and they don't really understand what good information anymore is, and changes the whole notion of etiquette and notion of the civility. And also this deepening kind of antagony between Trump administration and the media really kind of leads to distrust, cynicism, apathy towards any major institutions, including the media institutes, the political parties, and that really kind of leads to kind of it really corrupts the basis of the notion of democracy, and it's like a really alarming trend that is really, really important to focus on right now, because we really need to go back and look at those standards and see, so what is the goal mean? What are the actual things we really have to strive for? Because right now we have lost that.
And I would add, actually, that is, excuse me, such a great question. My concern for the future is that when you have the President of the United States putting out alternative facts via Twitter every single day, every single night, all day long, every single hour and minute of the day, it becomes something that we almost accept. And that's really scary. I hope that we all get our collective breath, catch our collective breath, and say, this is not okay. Not just him, but people can't continue to perpetuate non-truth. It's going to damage our society, just as Sergey said. So.
I also, taking it out of the arena of politics and putting it into economics, you can take that question and then ask yourselves about your clients. What's going to happen when your next generation boss is a Gen X or millennial and is a Twitter native or whatever they call them? What does it mean for you and your practice of public relations? How are you going to advise those clients? Are you going to be able to keep a seat at the table in an era of a client who thinks nothing of going home and his idea of having fun is sitting in front of his little handheld and tweeting? So, I mean, these are important questions. And I appreciate you all being here to participate in this discussion. Larry, your turn.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank the panelists for their remarks. They really were terrific and very thought through, and the chapter for organizing this discussion. I want to build a bit on what Mitch just said and ask an observation and a question from a practitioner's perspective. In my experience, often executives, CEOs will model behavior after what they see in the White House, good or bad. And as it relates to communication, my concern is at what point do we see executives say to us as advisors to them about communications issues or challenges, screw the media. I mean, that's what Trump does. Why do I need to worry about this? Why is that important? Tell me why I should be concerned about what the media thinks. Because either the perspective, the demonization of the media, the discounting of their influence, and going over the media via tweet or other purposes could lead to a set of behaviors that we as practitioners have to be concerned about. So my question is, how do we anticipate and deal with that issue and perhaps shut it down or divert it before we have a generation of business leaders who think the way to handle communications is to just basically keep the media at arm's length and say what the hell they want to say. Maybe I'll direct it to Sandra first because she's a practitioner. Others up there may have a point of view on this. But it is concerning to me that we don't want our clients to model behaviors after what they see in the White House.
Right, that's a great question. I think that goes back to my earlier remark where I mentioned that this is an opportunity to show your value and worth to your clients and to show how you can help them communicate an authentic message to their target audience such that we ultimately achieve the client's goal. So if your goal is to get people to get their children vaccinated, the idea is to do that thorough analysis so that you can have the numbers and the intelligence in front of you and argue the case that, yes, indeed, it is to your benefit, to the company's benefit, your client's benefit, to pay attention to the media and get your story out there to counteract any kind of fake news and cut through the clutter. So the idea is just to continue that effort and that relationship to show your net worth and your value, your value and your worth.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. I appreciate that comment, and I want to build on that too, because look, I just looked this up. Trump has 35 million Twitter followers right now. 35 million. That's important, right? But here's there may be some bots in there as well. So I think we need to make the point that there are 330 million Americans. There are how many? 7 billion people in the world right now. He's speaking to his base every time he tweets. He is not speaking to a broader audience. So you need the media You need a free press because you speak beyond that. If you want to talk to your people, you can just tweet all you want. You can just do your YouTube channel. The media exists as a forum to speak to a larger audience than just the people who may believe in you 100%. Also say quickly that there's a reason that Senator Orrin Hatch's office comes to me and says, will you cover something? To them, it's a validation. Because, yes, they can say everything they want in a press release, but when the Salt Lake Tribune covers it, they feel like they have some, okay, it's valid, it's out there, they've been vetted in some form.
A quick ad. You got to do both. You got to do real media and do the press releases, and then you got to magnify it on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's not an either or anymore. That's an absolute fact.
And let me just add on to that, is that you also have to do both in the sense that you need to give the easily digestible messages, but then the breadcrumbs to the credibility. And that's again why I talk about stop, drop, and roll. You don't just say stop, drop, and roll and then say, trust me on that, or cover your cough. See, if you do one or the other, it's not going to be effective. If you just get a slogan out there, they say, well, how's that any different from, Run for the Hills or something like that? So you need the backstory, you need the research. If you just come out with the research without something to grab their attention, then then people aren't going to, get to that research. So, and I'll just give you an example, just as a plug for stratcom360.org. If you click the video essays, there's one about health communication, and there's a lot of insight there. There's just brief videos, but it really shows how if you want to get a health message across, and the reason I talk about health is they're very complicated, they involve a lot of stress. Everybody is concerned about health care, whether to pay for it or whether they have their own conditions to deal with. So when you're sharing health messages or any type of message that's in an environment of stress or uncertainty, you really need to balance that with attention-grabbing slogans that people will remember, people will hear, people will pay attention to, but with that ballast of expertise that people can then, draw upon so that they can buy into those messages that may have gotten their attention. And that's, again, the differentiator.
Can I add one more thing, too? A lot of times in our research, we have found out, too, that sources of information is not always the news for many people on different topics and different issues. So we have found out that sometimes developing partnerships as a way of getting messages across have nothing to do with the news. And so when people talk about, for example, wanting to get information from credible sources, sometimes that means from their doctors on issues of vaccination, not from a news article. They have more trust and belief in their physicians or their pediatricians than a news article. Or sometimes that might mean a colleague from a similar industry and hearing the news from them as opposed to a news article. So there are other ways of getting around fake news and still reaching out to people in a way that's authentic.
If I could just follow up on that. Just a second, wait for you to the microphone. I'll be right back. Since it's a follow-up, I got to allow it. Right? One follow-up, right?
Tony Dorsey with AASHTO. Sandra, I just want you talked about how before you do anything, before you develop a message, you do the research. Can you talk about that research? How do you formulate it? Do you hire somebody to do the surveys? What do you do?
Well, we have that capacity in-house, and depending on what we're trying to find out and from whom, the research design and methodologies are different. So if we're trying to do research, say with construction workers for a campaign that we helped the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, it was clear that trying to reach small business contractors, say roofers working on house roofs, et cetera, a public opinion survey was not going to work. These guys typically are not, on the internet all day. They're out on a roof. So for something like that, we use a methodology that is easier to get access to them. So for example, in that instance, we did use focus groups. And we used focus groups to determine why they were not working safely from heights, because NIOSH brought us in because there were high incidences of fatalities and injuries as a result of workers falling from rooftops. And the reason that was the case was because they were not taking the necessary precautions to work safely from heights. So in that instance, we determined that the focus group was easier way to get access to them, say, than a public opinion poll on the internet. So the methodology changes according to who we're trying to reach, and why we're trying to reach them and what kind of information we are trying to get. So if we want to get, for example, just a blanket idea of people's opinions on a certain topic and get a lot of stats, then we would, and we're trying to reach, say, professional workers, white-collar folks, then a survey might be the quickest and easiest way to go about it. If we want to do a deep dive and get really into fears, concerns, expectations, wants, needs, etc., then that requires a methodology that allows us to do that, and that would be something like an in-depth interview or a focus group, and which we can do in person or through webinar or web-enabled.
Hello, I'm Joshua Spicer with the American Geophysical Union. We represent 60,000 Earth and space scientists around the globe. I have a comment and a question. My first comment is just about semantics. I think that for me personally, each time I hear fake news, it drives me a little nuts because I think it should be just called lies straight across the board. And I think that's just my comment. My question is, we represent a lot of climatologists around the globe, and we're particularly concerned right now about Scott Pruitt's EPA red team, blue team climate change process that he's proposing. This seems to me to use Sergey's term, an active effort in misinformation. And I'm wondering, when we're not even allowed in the door, a lot of our scientists aren't going to even be allowed to participate in either team. How do you respond to something like this when it's coming down from the top?
Okay. Well, I asked Pruitt that when he did the briefing at the White House press office. It was right after the climate change agreement was withdrawn. And I said, how can you say that we're not breaking our promise, and it isn't the reason that you're claiming, which he did in his opening, that CO2 emissions are dropping is because of the very regulations that stop the smokestack spews that you're trying to deregulate now. You're trying to pull those regulations away. I mean, I figured those were common sense questions. And his answer was, it wasn't a real agreement because it wasn't a treaty. Oh, so I guess the agreement doesn't mean anything that everybody agreed to, 190 countries. And he said, gee, what was his answer? He said, because of fracking and, what did he say, horizontal drilling or something. First of all, I don't know why horizontal drilling makes any difference, but fracking is a huge polluter in itself in terms of groundwater and causing earthquakes and all of that. So that's the answer he gave, and the battle that we have is to counter with real facts in terms of his counter.
And to answer your question, we actually been doing some research at George Mason about disinformation against climate change and climate change scientists. Specifically, if you look at the proceedings of our first international conference on character assassination research, John Cook, who is a blogger and he talks a lot about science and skeptical science, he pretty much works with the notion of inoculation theory, where you pretty much intervene early and educate the public and educate about the science, man-made climate change, and the causes. And that's how you counter frame and respond to contrarians' framing and messages they're trying to implant in different internet resources. And currently they're actually trying to do like machine learning, where the machine can recognize some of those instances of disinformation and misinformation and pretty much develop counterframes against those anti-climate change framing.
Hank Wallace of Write and Speak Like the News. Will the little lie technique supplant the traditional big lie technique for savvy fake news? Sandra, you're mentioning audiences becoming in part savvier. Well, are fake newsers becoming savvier? And one way to do that is to draw back from the outlandish claim, Senator Smith is a thief. Instead, sound more responsible, credible, by saying, Senator Smith is allegedly a thief.
Is that a marketing question?
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that, actually. I love to cite my mother as my focus group often. It is there's sometimes when she calls me about something and she asks a question about something and I'm like, where did you hear this? Well, I saw it on TV. And where? I don't know, somewhere on TV. I guess it is a concern, obviously, that we continue into this. There's a great documentary on Netflix on Roger Stone, by the way. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic and kind of scary. I guess the only counter to that is critical thinking and checking your sources and trying to push back on when people just assume things because they've been hinted at so long, then they become just in your mind, this is actually true, when that's not the case. So critical thinking and checking sources, I guess, is the only way to solve that situation.
Gore's movie made a huge difference when it came out, whatever it was, 10, 12, 14 years ago. And he's got a new one coming out, which is going to answer, I think, a lot of what you're talking about.
I would also say, you know, what you're talking about is sort of like this, almost like this evolution of nuance. And this happens a lot, even like in a positive context, if we're trying to communicate and someone says something that's not true, and you don't want to say, you're a liar, because then it's just like, it just spikes the cortisol. It's like, you know, they're just both. It sort of levels the playing field in the sense that you don't believe anything. And there's nuance that you can say that, you know, when we do a media training, you know, the way to say someone's a liar is you say, I don't know that that's the case. And that actually leaves you wiggle room in case you're wrong about them lying, you know, and say that's not true. There's a difference between saying that's not true and I don't know that that's the case. The vibe you're getting across is still you're a liar, but you're polite and you're giving yourself some wiggle room. But I think you know, we've heard the term critical thinking. And again, I think that's so important because as communicators, to try to navigate whatever situation, whether it's a proactive messaging situation or whether your client has a crisis, the more you can think through the stakeholder dynamics, the better. I'll give you an example. And again, this is a quick, you know, we did a quick essay on this about the United Airlines, the PR disaster when they dragged the patient, or they dragged a passenger off the plane who became a patient. You know, the thing is, you know, this happens, things happen, you know, like why was this so huge? Why was this the bump heard around the world? And if you put a little analysis on it and sort of look at some of what the dynamics are in terms of how we think and how we process information, our little video, we isolated 3 things. One was images speak louder than words. United Airlines has a lower bump rate than most of the others in the industry. But because this is such a visceral, visual thing where he's getting dragged down the aisle, the anecdote really overweighs the science. The mixed messages, I think that's sort of, you know, PR 101, the mixed messages with Oscar Munoz. One day he's saying, you know, trashing the passenger. The next day he's saying, oh, we did a horrible thing. I think that sort of vacillating didn't do him any good. And then there's also a concept of, and this is neuroscience, audience priming. If an audience is primed to perceive, in this case, just 2 weeks before that bumping incident, United barred entry to some passengers because they were wearing leggings. And then there's even the larger priming of, well, the airlines are just cutthroat anyway, they're squeezing us in. And so the audience is ready to perceive and they're primed to be irked. And I think that's what the media is dealing with now. And to a certain extent, we got ourselves into this. The media got itself into this before Trump, and I think that this is a real learning curve for the media. I actually think this is going to be a real renaissance for the media because they're really going to need to step up. They need to take ownership that they helped create this. And now they're in a situation where they need to differentiate themselves by the rigor that they put behind it and still find a way to do it through the lens of, you know, popular, you know, making sure the needle bounces and getting people to pay attention and really sort of striking that balance.
Can we differentiate here? I'm a print reporter versus TV.
I would just like to note there is a big difference between what is on TV when you talk about the media and print journalists.
Thank you. So truth in advertising, we're closing in on 10 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. These two gentlemen here have raised their hands. If you wouldn't mind to take these two more questions, and then we'll wrap this event up, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Grubbs from Wiki Patrol. It's interesting you mentioned the United. If we were just showing Mitch a chart for the bump in United for Wikipedia viewership in United, it's a huge spike. We have a picture of it. My question is, you talk a lot about content to fight fake news, but what I'm curious about is the format to fight fake news. In the world of too long didn't read, the death of the long form article, and the fact that fake news tends to be a quip. It's 200-300 words long, not backed up by facts. Is there opportunities to simply change the format, looking at the way readership is evolving and the amount of information? I grew up reading one newspaper, now I read 15 every morning. So, you know, how can you change the format to fight the fake news, I guess is the core of my question. So.
Well, one of the great things you can do is put go to and have a link to add the addition, and we do that all the time. We have a longer version that has the amplification and charts and numbers. So make your case in the short version and then do a go to.
Rick Blake, Strategic Health Resources. We do government relations, so that means we were fresh from the healthcare battle. We defended the Medicaid expansion and the Affordable Care Act. Please call it the Affordable Care Act because it's not Obamacare, it's the Affordable Care Act. But anyway, I think generally recognize the fact that the destabilization of democracy is not just between the media and the publics or the media and government, but it occurs out beyond Washington, you know, and the cultural divide is there and is precipitous, and it influences all we do. So, you know, having the idea of having a strategic thought group is really great because having dealt with Congress for the last God knows how long, it really needs to happen. But my question is, how do you see the destabilization of democracy, not just in long term, but in short term, because we have to take collective responsibility on a daily basis, and what we do is what we do. You know, we do our jobs. We write legislation, we do our op-ed pieces, but as personal and individuals, how far would we go as individuals to protect democracy? And I think it's an unwinding of our democratic processes.
I think that's a great point and a great question. I believe that every single one of us has a responsibility to stand up and do the right thing, regardless of what you do for a living or where you live, whether it's in DC or somewhere else. I think it's going to take the collective wisdom and the collective interest from every single one of us, and then some, to turn things around so that we don't just become desensitized to what's going on and what's being said, and then this phenomenon called the F word, fake news. If we don't all stand up and do something and do the right thing and say something, things won't change. So I don't think there's a choice. I think we have to.
I'll say this briefly. Show of hands, how many people in the room have Facebook? Twitter? Instagram? Congratulations, you're all the media. As much as everyone wants to blame the media for everything, one of my favorite things I see on Facebook is, why doesn't the media cover this? Well, actually, you're spreading that to how many followers, how many friends? Excuse me. I think the point I'm trying to make is, if there's a responsibility out there, we all own it these days, not just a newspaper or a TV station. We are all part of it.
And we're part of the solution too, I think.
I would just let me just say something briefly, because you asked about how personally we should do this, and this really does get down to a personal decision, because when you stick your head up and try to say that's not right, or to try to sort of speak the truth, I think that that's sort of almost like an ethical, a moral step that we need to take. But that said, don't take that step blindly, because you need to sort of know what will be coming at you. Otherwise, it will damage your career or your psyche. And that's why, whether it's a character assassination report by our research lab, or whether it's just understanding, what happens when you really challenge authority or challenge someone who's lying, you don't want to go into that blind or just thinking, well, I'm doing the right thing, so I'll somehow be magically protected. Your character will be attacked if you stand up too boldly about this. So it involves a certain amount of preparation. It involves a certain amount of being realistic, and a certain amount of coalition building, so you don't feel like you're alone. Because if that's the case and you're standing there alone, it's going to hurt, and your efficacy will go down over time. So I would say, on a personal level, don't underestimate the risk you're taking. Don't let that stop you from doing the right thing, but just don't go into it blind.
Thank you very much. We're 5 minutes over. I apologize. I hope we've given you some food for thought. I hope it's thought that you can take back to your workplace, discuss with your colleagues here around the table. I thank you for your time and for your attention and your energy. Please, if you make yourself, the folks I know at Wiki Patrol are going to be around for a little while, so please make sure you touch base with them. I do recommend the George Mason University CARP report. I think you'll find it of great value. And with that, I wish you a great day. Thank you. Oh, I want to thank these guys for coming here today as well. It was a great, great panel. Thank you for your time and your energy.
And thank you, Mitch, for organizing and conducting this panel. Thank you, Mitch.